Welcome to Dey Weekly. I'm your host, Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle. Here's week 7 of Dey Weekly. I'll provide a quick recap from the week 7 of the Bengals game. And for all you football fantasy enthusiasts, I'll also cover the top 5 point getters from this week. Week 7 versus the Cleveland Browns. Cincinnati Bengals defeated the Cleveland Browns 21-14 in their week 7 matchup on Sunday. Here are some key highlights from the game. Charlie Jones started the game with a 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown just 12 seconds into the game. Joe Burrow connected with Jamar Chase for an 18-yard touchdown, and T. Higgins from a 25-yard touchdown in the third quarter. The Bengals defense intercepted Browns backup quarterback Darian DTR Thomas Robinson twice, with Geno Stone and Sam Hubbard making key interceptions. Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson suffered a season-ending Achilles injury, which added to the Browns' struggles. The Browns managed to score a late touchdown by Jameis Winston to David Njoku, but the Bengals recovered the onside kick to secure the win. This brought the Bengals' record to 3-4, while the Browns fell to 1-6. Next up for the Cincinnati Bengals, the Philadelphia Eagles for their whiteout game. Don't forget, all you Cincinnati Bengals fans, wear all white to the game this Sunday. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Running Through the Jungle, of course, like and subscribe and share with your friends my channel as well. Also, make sure that you listen to us on all your podcast platforms, Spotify and Apple and whatever other platforms there are. Also, join us on Wednesdays for our Running Through the Jungle predictions. Now, I'm going to take a quick commercial break for our sponsors. I'll be right back. You'll get to look at my ugly mug if you're watching me on YouTube. Welcome back to Dey Weekly. Again, my name's Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle, or from the Dey Weekly episode. So today, I'm going to cover the fantasy football point getters. For your leading scorer for the NFL was Lamar Jackson. He was number 1. He had a total of 34.44 points. Lamar Jackson did what Lamar Jackson likes to do. 281 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, and he ran for 52 yards, and he lost 1 fumble. Again, I said he had 34.44 points. At number 2 for the quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield versus Baltimore, had 370 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He had 22 rushing yards, 1 2-point conversion made for 27 points. Russell Wilson versus the New York Jets. Welcome back, Russ. He had 264 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 rushing yards for 1 touchdown. He had 24.86 points. Jalen Hurts for the Philadelphia Eagles versus the New York Giants. He had 114 yards passing and 1 touchdown, 22 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, and 76 points for fantasy. At number 5, Josh Allen had 323 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing yard for 21.02 points. And then to the bell cows, the running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs versus Minnesota, had 116 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. He had 4 receptions for 44 yards for 32 points. Then there was Rachaad White versus Baltimore, had 40 rushing yards. He had 6 receptions for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns for 29.10 points. Saquon Barkley versus the New York Giants had 176 yards rushing, 1 touchdown. He also had 2 receptions for 11 yards for 26.70 points. Joe Mixon versus the Green Bay Packers had 115 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. He had 2 receptions for 9 yards for 26.40 points. Breece Hall at number 5, versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, had 38 rushing yards, 1 touchdown. He had 6 receptions for 106 yards receiving for 26.10 points. Now to the wide receivers. And this is all brought to you guys by NFLFantasy.com or FantasyNFL.com, by the way. Wide receivers, Ahmad Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Sun God, versus Minnesota, had 8 receptions, 112 yards, and 1 touchdown for 25.20 points. Rashad Bateman versus Tampa Bay had 4 receptions, 121 yards, and 1 touchdown for 22.10 points. George Pickens versus the New York Jets had 5 receptions, 111 yards, and 1 touchdown, and had 22.10 points as well. At number 4, Brian Thomas Jr. versus New England had 2 rushing yards, 5 receptions for 89 yards and 1 touchdown, and he had 1 2-point conversion completion for 22.10 points. And then Jay Jetta, Justin Jefferson versus Detroit, had 3 rushing yards, 7 receptions for 81 yards and 1 touchdown for 21.40 points. Now to the tight ends, David Njoku versus Cincinnati had 10 receptions, 76 yards, 1 touchdown for 23.60 points. Jonnu Smith versus the Indianapolis Colts had 7 receptions, 96 yards, and 1 touchdown, and with 22.60 points. Mark Andrews versus Tampa Bay had 4 receptions for 41 yards and 2 touchdowns for 20.10 points. The rookie out of Georgia, Brock Bowers versus the Los Angeles Rams had 10 receptions and 93 yards for 19.30 points. Cade Otton from Tampa Bay versus the Baltimore Ravens had 8 receptions for 100 yards for 18 points. Now to the kickers, maybe. There we go. Kickers, as Beatard or Brandon Harriet likes to say, these guys are not football players. But anyways, to the kickers. At number 1, Cameron Dicker versus Arizona had made 3 field goals. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 5 field goals. 2 of them were 50-plus yarders for 19 points. Will Lutz versus New Orleans had 3 PATs and 4 field goals, 1 over 50 yards for 17 points. Austin Siebert versus Carolina had 4 PATs and 4 field goals for 16 points. Daniel Carlson versus the Los Angeles Rams had 5 field goals for 15 yards. And Chris Boswell had 4 PATs and 3 field goals made for 13 points. Now to the defense. The Denver Broncos comes in at number 1 versus New Orleans, had 6 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. They scored a defensive touchdown, only allowed 10 points, and had 20 fantasy points. The Los Angeles Rams versus the Las Vegas Raiders had 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble recovery, scored 1 touchdown, allowed 15 points for 17 fantasy points. The Washington Commanders versus Carolina had 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 1 touchdown, allowed 7 points for 16 fantasy points. Seattle Washington versus Atlanta Falcons had 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, 1 fumble, and scored 1 defensive touchdown, and only allowed 14 points for a total of 16 fantasy points. The Cincinnati Bengals at number 5. I never thought we'd say this, but at number 5 versus Cleveland had 4 sacks, 2 interceptions, had a kickoff return, allowed 14 points for 15 fantasy points. Now to the perfect lineup. If you had Lamar Jackson, who had 34.44 points, Jahmyr Gibbs with 32 points, White from Tampa Bay had 29.1 points, Ahmad, the Sun God St. Brown, had 25.2 points, Brian Thomas Jr. from Jacksonville had 22.1 points, Njoku, tight end from the Cleveland Browns, had 23.6 points. Saquon Barkley, if you use him as a flex or starting running back, had 26.7 points. Dicker from the Los Angeles Chargers, the kicker, had 19 points. And the Broncos had 20 points. If you had all of those, you would have had a total of 232.14 points. You would have had a great fantasy lineup if you had the perfect lineup. Now, as NFL fantasy football likes to say, the I'm perfect lineup. CJ Stroud, Houston Texans, only had 5.34 points. Mostert from the Miami Dolphins had 3 points. Singletary from the New York Giants had 3.1 points. Tank Dell, 0 points. Williams from the Detroit Lions, which I hear he's in a little bit of trouble, and possibly, from what I read, was a suspension for 2 games, I think. Only had 0.6 points. Sam Laporta, he was a great fantasy tight end last year. Not so much this year. It's 3.5 points as of right now. Devontae Smith from the Philadelphia Eagles only had 0.8 points. Hopkins from the Cleveland Browns had 0 points. And if you had the New York Giants defense, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Only had -3 points. If you had that lineup, you lost your rear off and you only had 13.34 points. So thank you guys so much for watching not running through the jungle. Well, it is a running through the jungle episode, but thank you for watching Dey Weekly with your boy, Tim Lyons. That's me. Thank you guys for viewing, liking, subscribing. We love your guys' continued support. We love it that you guys go on the podcast. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating on the podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and share with your friends on YouTube and also Spotify and Apple. Thank you guys so much. You guys have a great week. Dey.